Hello, everyone. My name is Koen, the World Bank Group Executive Director, representing 13 countries from Europe and Central Asia, including my own, the Netherlands, to the World Bank. I'm very pleased to welcome you today to the virtual event to release the World Bank Inspection Panel's latest advisory report, Insights of the World Bank Inspection Panel Responding to Project-Related Gender-Based Violence Complaints Through an Independent Accountability Mechanism. This is about gender-based violence. Because it's a long title, I just wanted to repeat that. This is the 6th in the panel's Emerging Lessons series. It's based on lessons from 2 panel investigations in gender-based violence in World Bank-supported projects in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. This report aims to basically use the lessons that the panel cases have produced to contribute to institutional learning at the World Bank, but also in the broader development community. That the panel is releasing the report today is no coincidence, because it coincides with the annual 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign, which ends tomorrow on Human Rights Day, the birthday of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Gender-based violence is widespread, and the detrimental effects it has on women, children, but also men and families around the globe are far-reaching. So it goes without saying that this is an important topic, and we have a group of eminent experts today to discuss it, starting with Michelle Bachelet, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Commissioner Bachelet, welcome. You were twice elected President of Chile, and during your tenure, you promoted the rights of all, but particularly of those who were the most vulnerable. You were also the very first Executive Director of UN Women, an organization which is, of course, also very relevant to today's topic. You've graciously agreed to provide the opening remarks to today's event, and I thank you for joining us in particular in this busy week of Human Rights Day. High Commissioner Bachelet, you have the virtual floor. Oh, you're muted. Hi, Commissioner,
yes. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Greeting to everyone. I am very glad to be present at this for this timely and important discussion on the findings of the inspection panel's latest advisory report, which provides insights into responding to project-related gender-based violence through an independent accountability mechanism. The bank's desire to integrate the lessons drawn by the panel from experiences in Uganda and the DRC is commendable. I also welcome the World Bank's efforts to prevent and respond to gender-based violence committed in the context of project implementation. The UN system has been also grappling with these issues. In 2017, building on an independent review on sexual exploitation and abuse by peacekeeping forces in Central African Republic, the Secretary General adopted a strategy to improve the UN system-wide approach to preventing and responding to sexual abuse and exploitation, whether committed by UN personnel or non-UN forces. Currently, my office is working with the World Health Organization regarding an upcoming commission of inquiry to investigate allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse affecting more than 50 women in the DRC during the recent Ebola outbreak. I'm well aware of the complex legal and moral questions these situations raise. Above all, we must do everything in our power to ensure we do not hurt those who we're supposed to serve. So we have the responsibility to act with human rights due diligence. Doing so will enhance the trust and involvement of host communities and the credibility they give to us and our activities. Above all, it will uphold their human rights, which is the core goal of all the UN's work. The annual 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, which, as you mentioned, ends tomorrow, reminds us that gender-based violence afflicts our fellow human beings in all societies. It both manifests and drives discrimination against women and girls. It is arguably the most pervasive of all human rights violations. And yet, gender-based violence is often met with inadequate prevention and faulty accountability measures. Blame continues to be placed on victims, the conduct of perpetrators continue to be viewed as routine, and survivors often encounter unsurmountable obstacles to justice. So our family of international organizations and bodies calls very often on states to spare no efforts to address gender-based discrimination and violence. It is only natural that we walk the talk and strengthen our own responses. So the World Bank's work to prevent gender-based violence in projects by strengthening risk management system is significant. I note the bank's guidance to staff on project-induced labor influx challenges and the integration of violence in the good practice note on assessing and managing the risk and impact of using security personnel. In addition, the bank now requires contractors to sign a code of conduct that explicitly details the prohibition of and penalties for any sexual relation with children. You have also developed an interesting tool to assess the likelihood of sexual abuse, exploitation, or harassment at the conceptualization stage of major civil work project. Using its 25 evidence-based indicators, mitigation measures can be baked into potentially risky projects from their inception, including hiring gender-based violence specialists and mapping local partners that work on sexual abuse and exploitation, including with survivors. Other multilateral development banks have also been innovating in this field. The Inter-American Development Bank has included a dedicated standalone standard on gender equality in its new environmental and social policy framework. And I hope this example will be replicated by all the development finance institutions. At the UN, systems have been set up to screen candidates for employment to avoid rehiring individuals who have been involved in sexual exploitation and abuse. Risk assessments are required with regard to major deployment. Staff and partners are trained to prevent, detect, and respond to sexual misconduct. Policies have also been put in place to assess implementing partners vis-à-vis their capacity to prevent and respond to sexual exploitation and abuse, with the UN protocol on allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse involving implementing partners, issued a year ago, requiring adequate safeguards and action on this regard. To ensure that they are effective, all responses to gender-based violence need to place a priority focus on the rights and needs of victims. The human rights victim-centered approach requires prioritizing the do not harm principle, full respect for confidentiality, and the informed consent of victims. It also requires referral to legal, medical, psychosocial, or other services, and the physical and emotional protection of victims, witnesses, or whistleblowers. And it needs a clear focus on measures to ensure accountability and redress. This is not without challenges. As we all know, despite many efforts, the number of convictions for sexual exploitation, abuse, or harassment remains extremely low, whether in the context of development project or in peacekeeping and humanitarian operations. Victims often face stigma and may fear reprisals if they come forward. So the access to national justice system may be impeded by bureaucratic hurdles, economic barriers, insufficient investigative capacity by national authorities, or basic mistrust. In addition, these cases can be complex, involving different states and the applicability of extraterritorial jurisdictional rules. So we have a responsibility to advocate and support necessary reforms to ensure that national justice system and other accountability mechanisms can respond adequately to these cases of gender-based violence. Before closing, I want to clarify what we mean by the need for remedies and assistance to victims. Firstly, providing remedy to victims entails acknowledging responsibility for the abuses or violations they have suffered. Too often, the harms that have been done to people and the environment are met with denial, backpassing, and the shirking of responsibility. When blame is deflected in this way, the suffering of victims is increased. The human rights-based approach requires responsible parties to do more than offer ex gratia assistance, more or less out of the kindness of their hearts. It requires acknowledge of a responsibility to assist the victim to regain her or his rights and dignity. In this respect, the bank's action plan for the Uganda Transport Sector Development Project is impressively clear and comprehensive, including its provisions for resettlement compensations with financial assistance, counseling and services such as healthcare, prenatal assistance, and school reintegration programs. These steps towards acknowledging and realizing victims' rights have been hard-won. Implementing this measure will involve many challenges, but I pay tribute to the bank, inspection panel, today's distinguished panelists, and many others in helping to achieve this measure's progress. I hope it will inspire more proactive and effective responses by all multinational development banks in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, for your important words. And I think you rightly highlighted so many important things. First of all, that a lot is being done, but secondly, a lot more needs to be done. And we need a strong international partnership to combat this most pervasive of human rights violations, as you said. And also you stressed very strongly the survivor-centric approach. And we will end up talking more about that in the rest of the morning. I know you have to leave because this is a busy Human Rights Week, but thank you so much for being with us and inspiring us with your words. Thank you. Let's continue. We have several distinguished speakers today to discuss their perspectives on the topic of gender-based violence and how to make progress, of course, in combating it and helping survivors. And I'll briefly introduce them before giving each of them the floor. And after that, of course, we will have time for questions and hopefully also answers. First of all, Moses Ntenga is the founder and director of Joy for Children Uganda. Since 2005, he has championed the rights of children to live peacefully and without exploitation. He helped represent the affected communities that brought the Uganda complaint to the inspection panel, and later served as a member of the World Bank's Global Gender-Based Violence Task Force. Moses, a warm welcome. Elana Berger is the executive director of the Bank Information Center. Elana joined BIG in 2012 to start up its children's rights program and has been instrumental in pushing the bank to take decisive action in addressing gender-based violence. They played an important role in supporting Moses in the Uganda complaint. Welcome, Elana. Inspection panel chair Imrana Jalal made all of this happen, of course, and the panel produced the report we're discussing today, and that I warmly recommend for your reading. And she will discuss some of the key insights of the panel's advisory report. Before joining the panel in 2018, she served for 7 years as principal social development specialist for the Asian Development Bank. Welcome, Imrana. And Maninder Gill is a global director, environmental and social framework at the World Bank, and he will talk about some of the actions that the bank has been taking. Maninder has been pioneering social development and safeguards issues in the World Bank since 1995, and was director of social development before, leading a team of many bank colleagues committed to the cause. Welcome, Maninder. And last but not least, Dubravka Simonovic. She is the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. Warm welcome to you. And she was a member before and the chairperson also of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the monitoring body that oversees the UN's Convention on Women's Rights. Welcome, Dubravka. Thank you all for participating. We will start with short opening statements from the speakers, followed by questions and answers. You can use the YouTube chat page already to ask your questions. Please include your name and affiliation, and we will, of course, address as many questions as we can. We're recording today's session, and a video of this session will be uploaded to the panel website in due course, so you can review this session as well. Moses, can I ask you to begin with your opening words?
Yeah, thank you very much, ED Mr. Koen, for this opportunity and leading this panel. And I also want to appreciate other panelists, and including the people who are watching us through YouTube. This evening in Kampala, and I'm sure it is morning in Washington. And I want to really appreciate the bank and the inspection panel for putting together this meeting to reflect on what the journey we have moved in terms of addressing GBV in the bank finance project. And as an ED, as you have rightly put, and the leader of a small organization in Kampala, when we got in touch with the cases of GBV within the communities that we are serving and involving the World Bank in a big project, it was quite overwhelming, I would say, because the cries of the girls, the cries of the parents and women were overwhelming, not only on GBV, but also on other issues. But of course, we want to acknowledge that GBV had the big impact, as many girls dropped out of school, got pregnant, and many of them, some actually were also infected with HIV/AIDS, something that, we all realize that is reversible. And while we are grappling with this issue and looking at where we can start and who can hear the voices of the girls and their parents, we made the first attempt of seeking redress within the bank. That was 2014, which was not listened to because there were more allegations that issues of GBV don't happen in our projects and all that. So it was quite hard to make the case, but we didn't give up. Then in 2015, we again put in a request. And when we put a request then, that's when we saw things changing drastically with the inspection panel coming on board. And we got several calls as soon as the case was registered. And things started to move, not only for GBV, but for whichever was not moving well, it started to move. And as the person who was based on the ground, one of the things I normally talk about, it was hard for me to distinguish between the inspection panel and the World Bank. They sit in the SM office, they're all World Bank, and I was quite confused. Who is who? Whom do I trust that they will actually have the issues of the community addressed and we don't get reprisal or we not get affected? And luckily, we came to understand that the panel is independent and the bank board and support it. And they are up to the job of ensuring that the bank doesn't cause harm to the communities. If anything happens, there's quick response. So from there, I would say that girls were helped because we saw the government come out, the government then led by UNRWA come out. We saw the World Bank make endless trips to the community. We saw everyone really get involved. And in my view, that when the case was registered and we started getting the people pay attention, then the voices that were silent, the voices that did have hope, started being heard. And I think that was very, very important to hear somebody calling to discuss a pertinent issue affecting the girls. They're deep in the community. The community worked with was Vigodi. It is in between the forest from Poto to Kamwenge. And then it's quite a small community. But knowing that the world put attention to it, I think was very encouraging for the girls, was very encouraging for the people that worked with on the community to get this redress. But also through the bank, the inspection panel case, we also saw that the lives and hopes and rights of the community were restored, that rights to be heard and also to seek redress when they have things going wrong. And I think that will forever live in their hearts. Those who participated, they feel that's a huge success, including myself, because they were able to cause the change on something that looked impossible in the eyes of many of us, with a lot of personal risks. But when it finally turned out, then people now, including myself, we are happy that we can cause change or we can speak without really being retaliated on. But also the other issue that also we got that during this case, the inspection panel was very much supportive in terms of ensuring that there is no retaliation, both I think from the community or there would be other interested persons, and we were able really to survive on the case that we really thought that was extremely risky, and we thank the bank support on that. And also, I would also to say that this very case has brought issues of GBV to the center of World Bank discussion, and something probably that was not there before. And when you talk about, girls are married, girls are sexually abused, everybody would think you are talking different language. And they'll go back and ask, how did you get to know? Where are these girls? How do you know? What is motivating you to talk about these things? But I told you, look, here are the girls. They can speak for themselves. The community can speak for itself of the harms that really were happening. And so for us, I think as an organization, but also as a country and the community, I think we are proud that we are the center of what looked to be an ugly story for our country. But now we are happy that it is more of a success story that is leading a lot of changes. I was some time back in Liberia, and they were telling me there is a World Bank project, and they want to NGOs to work on issues of GBV during the construction. I was happy how wide and far the impact of this community or this road has gone to impact other communities around the globe. And then some of the definitely other things that also we are very happy that came out of this project was that other MDBs were able to come and benchmark and see what were the issues in this project related to GBV that we can mitigate. We have had discussions with the European Union, we have discussed discussions with USAID, we have had discussions also with DFID on these very issues. And we think it has, in the due course, really helped a lot of communities, and will continue to do that. And that's where now we see much of the role of the inspection panel coming in. But also I was also fortunate to represent my communities and the country on the World Bank Global Task Force on GBV that was created by Dr. Kim. It was a huge opportunity for me, but also for our community, that now after identifying the harms, then they are calling somebody who probably was looked at as a trouble causer to come and discuss and find ways forward. And for us during that team, and my own presence during that time was much more to bring our experiences in Uganda, to bring experiences of the local person in terms of how the bank can help them and protect their rights, and probably also help them when their issues have been, their rights have been violated. And most times I would be at the panel telling them, no, that approach won't work in my country. My grandmother will not read an email. My grandmother may not attend those meetings, and we need to find a strategy of supporting the community. And when you look at the GBV task force that we had and the approaches we looked at, they were cutting through the communities, the government, and other stakeholders. Because some of these projects, you find one project, there are so many stakeholders involved. There's government, there are construction companies, there are other service providers, there is the community, and then the common man and woman and girls and boys that were supposed to be taken care of within framing of the recommendation of the Global Task Force to the World Bank. And there was, I would say, I was very impressed with the outcome of the panel, of the outcome of the task force, and more so the World Bank continuing to follow these issues to make sure that they become a reality. A few days ago, we were discussing on new measures or mechanisms of disqualifying, I think, projects that probably don't prevent GBV. And I think that is a very good step. And all other discussion, and we have seen guidance notes move around. We have seen so many initiatives being put in place. And I want to really appreciate the bank and the team and the inspection panel for this wonderful initiative, and for taking the voices of the people in the community seriously and moving forward to help other people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moses. I think in these difficult times and on this difficult topic, you've told us the story of hope. You've told us the story of a change that seemed impossible taking place. So that's a very hopeful and encouraging signal. And I thank you very much for sharing that. Can I give the floor to Elana for her opening remarks?
Sure. Thank you so much, Koen, and thank you to Imrana and the inspection panel, both for inviting me to speak on this panel, but also for publishing this incredibly important note. I want to focus my intervention on the really critical role played by civil society, both in the specific inspection panel case on the Uganda project and in World Bank gender-based violence reform more generally. In early 2014, a big consultant based in Uganda heard from Moses about high rates of teen pregnancy and increased school dropouts along a World Bank-funded roadway. BIC supported Joy for Children and the community in reaching out to multiple individuals in management at the World Bank. As Moses just noted, this initial outreach was met with hostility, with BIC and Joy for Children treated as a nuisance, an obstacle to meeting the bank's goals, rather than an integral player in helping the bank do development better. So when the bank ultimately realized they needed to look into the issue of sexual exploitation on the roadway, they, along with representatives of the Ugandan government, went out to the community without speaking with Joy for Children and without including any CSOs with connections on the ground in the community. And the bank held a large group meeting in the community asking, who here has been raped? Please speak up. I'm sure none of you are shocked to learn that nobody spoke up. Because the bank didn't include Joy for Children or other CSOs with expertise on the issue, they missed a critical opportunity to understand the issue and address the problem at the root. Bank management initially treated Joy for Children and the community's complaints as a PR issue rather than a legitimate failing of project design and implementation. But this really changed in two critical ways immediately after the case was brought to the attention of the inspection panel, even before a formal request for investigation was made. The first way in which this changed is that the bank began to take the issue seriously. Over the course of the next 5 years, the bank undertook a series of measures to both provide redress to the communities affected by the project and to reform the institution to better prevent and respond to GBV in future projects. The second way in which things changed was that the panel, and I have to particularly call out Gonzalo, Dilek, and Zainab, who were part of this investigation, actively sought out BIC and Joy for Children to engage in the process and to provide the panel with insights about the community and the various issues involved, making civil society, in particular Moses and his staff at Joy for Children, a critical partner in the process of investigating the complaint, meant that the panel was able to actually dialogue with individual affected community members in a constructive way, such that they could understand the facts of what happened in the case quickly and comprehensively, something that the bank management actually took months to manage. Because the panel was treating civil society as a genuine partner, some within bank management also began to work with civil society to address the failings of the project. And I have to specifically call out Maninder, who will be speaking shortly, as an incredibly positive example of this. BIC also engaged extensively with the Board of Executive Directors, including Koen's predecessor, on this issue. And the board became involved in insisting that the bank make comprehensive reforms to prevent another Uganda. Since the Uganda TSDP case, the World Bank has made incredible strides toward addressing gender-based violence in its project, becoming a leader among international financial institutions, something for which it should be sincerely commended. However, it is important to note that none of this would ever have happened without a sustained effort from civil society groups, and specifically the bravery and steadfastness of Joy for Children and the Bigodi community in continuing to raise this issue, along with the comprehensive investigation done by the inspection panel, the engagement by the Board of Executive Directors, and interest from the media. Without these things, these reforms would never have happened. Despite these facts, I regularly find that bank management, present company excluded, speak about GBV reforms without acknowledging the role civil society played in pushing for these reforms, speaking about the reforms as though the bank itself identified the need for change. Why does that matter? It matters because it leads the bank to fail to value civil society as a stakeholder in the reform itself. This means that the bank develops policies, programs, and practices to respond to GBV without genuine consultation with civil society. As a result, much of the bank's GBV prevention and response doesn't provide entry points for CSO engagement. This means that CSOs that identify risks of GBV around a project, have suggestions about how to prevent GBV in their particular context, or have learned of cases of GBV around a project may not be able to engage the bank and provide the benefit of their knowledge to bank management. There were 9 months between when Joy for Children and BIC initially approached bank management and when the bank finally suspended the project. In that time, several additional girls were sexually exploited by contractors working on the project and became pregnant. This demonstrates real harm that occurs from a failure to engage with civil society. It seems that since 2014, the bank has learned its lesson on the need to create policies and processes to address GBV in its projects and has made extensive commendable reform. But the lesson the bank has not yet learned is the need to genuinely value and engage with civil society who may have a critical perspective on World Bank lending. My hope is that moving forward, the bank will learn from the inspection panel's approach to partnering with civil society and will themselves prioritize engaging early and often with civil society groups on the ground in borrowing countries. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Elana, and thank you for really stressing the point of the need for a genuine partnership with CSOs. I would just like to mention it's a week since Jim Wolferson died, former president of the World Bank. I was at the bank when he was president, and he started opening the door to CSOs at the time. But as you said, that's an ongoing process. It's not a simple act, but it's something that has to be realized every single day. Thank you very much. Imrana, the floor, I would like to give the floor to you to talk about the report and its impact on GBV.
Thank you to my fellow panelists for participating today. So as Koen has mentioned, this report is based on two really groundbreaking investigations of the World Bank funded transport projects. And it's really important to know that when the complaint came to the panel in 2014, it was unprecedented for the bank and for the panel both to receive such a complaint. So this was breaking new ground at an international financial institution. And of the more or less 20 independent accountability mechanisms at the various financial institutions, the World Bank Inspection Panel was also the first IAM to receive such a complaint. And as you have heard, and you will hear more about this, especially from Maninder Gill on bank management, about how it transformed and changed the World Bank as an institution. I would like to first start out by saying that we really do pay tribute to the bank for the changes that it did, but we also want to pay, and in fact we do pay tribute to the CSO and NGOs that were involved in this in the Uganda investigation. And you've heard from both Elana Berger of the CSO, the Bank Information Center, and Moses from Joy for Children Uganda, the NGO that was the catalyst for the complaint. So really both BIC and Joy for Children were important catalysts for change at such an important, powerful, and huge institution as the World Bank. As you will read in the report, since the investigations, the bank has implemented a range of systemic and operational reforms to mitigate, to assess the risk of GBV in projects that it funds. When we submitted our Uganda report to the World Bank board, President Jim Yong Kim, the World Bank Group president at the time, announced the creation of the Global Gender-Based Violence Task Force to strengthen the institution's response to sexual exploitation and abuse issues, which Maninder will talk to you about in a few moments. So the panel is very pleased with the transformational changes that have occurred at the World Bank and other institutions. It is certainly an important time to encourage institutions that support infrastructure projects and investments to really make sure that they take account of gender and women's empowerment issues. I assume you all know the significant impact that large-scale infrastructure projects and investments have on economies and societies, particularly those that are being implemented in fragile and conflict-affected areas. By making infrastructure and investments more gender inclusive, their impact can be manifold. Gender-inclusive infrastructure enables access to basic services for many women and girls who often constitute the backbone of FCV economies, both in the informal and formal sectors, without compromising their safety and security. The UN, as you know, estimates that globally more than 1/3 of women have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, and women and girls in fragile conflict and violence affected contexts are in an especially precarious situation. So gender inclusive investments and infrastructure projects have the potential to end the cycle of reinforcing gender inequalities, and they are needed now more than ever. So the panel is not in any way suggesting that financial institutions should not fund projects in FCV countries. In fact, we pay tribute to the women in FCV countries, but we're asking that this is done in a very gender sensitive way. So what insights did we come up with in our gender-based violence advisory? Well, we came up with 7 insights. First, as I have already mentioned, gender inclusive infrastructure is a critical need in borrower countries and has a direct impact on women's empowerment, especially in terms of time poverty, reducing women's time poverty. However, unless there's a project-specific gender-based violence analysis or project-specific gender diagnostics, development may come at a significant human and gender-specific cost to women. Second, gender-based violence has far-reaching consequences for women, families, and communities. Apart from impeding their security, their mobility, and the livelihoods of women and children worldwide, the persistence of gender-based violence exacts a steep cost on victims, economies, and international financial institutions and multilateral development banks working towards poverty reduction. Third, the panel found that the intersectionality of specific factors led to gender-based violence can contribute to gender-based violence and can be an early warning sign of the high risk of project-related gender-based violence. These specific factors include low levels of gender equality, high rates of gender-based violence in the area generally, an influx of male construction workers, poor law enforcement, impunity from prosecution for gender-based violence, and often a fragile conflict and violence affected context. So all of these, the intersectionality of all of these factors can be an early warning sign of high risk of project-related gender-based violence. Fourthly, independent accountability mechanisms like the inspection panel, like the World Bank inspection panel, may in some cases provide an additional avenue and a safe space for victims of project-related GBV to seek redress and accountability. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way at all that the inspection panel and other IAMs are an option to courts of law. Clearly, courts of law are a significant avenue of redress for victims, but at the same time, it's important to realize that in certain contexts, and this has been mentioned by High Commissioner Bachelet, that the rates of enforcement are very low, access to courts of law are quite difficult in many poorer countries. And so in situations like this, independent accountability mechanisms may offer an additional safe space for women and children to file their complaints for gender-based violence. Fifth, the inspection panel says in its report that it is really important to adopt a survivor-centered approach to investigations with well-designed methodology. You already heard Elana's story about how in the situation in Uganda in the early days before the bank learned to better deal with complaints such as these, that they had a public meeting and asked women and girls to stand up if they and to say who they were in a public meeting if they had been sexually assaulted. So clearly this is not a survivor-centered approach, and the panel and the World Bank have learnt through its through experience and some of the mistakes that we made, how to adopt a proper survivor-centered approach to investigations on gender-based violence. Sixth, independent accountability mechanisms investigations of gender-based violence should always operate on the premise that the victim's claims are plausible and hold them to a similar standard of proof to that used for projects to complaints where there have been complaints of non-compliance related to other environmental and social policies in development projects. And what I mean by that is that there is no logic to say that we need to hold claims made by women and girls to a higher level of proof than we do for claims about violations of environmental and social policies. And finally, our seventh insight in the advisory is that complaints such as these, claims such as these, seeking accountability, remedies and institutional actions on behalf of women, children, and potentially gender minorities that are affected by project-related GBV can have a positive and long-lasting effect on development institutions and the communities they serve. Again, we hope that those in the development community will find our report useful. It can be accessed on the panel's website, and I believe that somebody has made it also available on the chat. Thank you very much, Koen.
Thank you very much, Imrana. Thank you for stressing the main points from the report, but I would still recommend people read the full report to get all the insights. But I think it's important that you stress the survivor-centric approach, that you stress the need not to have an impossible threshold in terms of taking complaints seriously. You stress the early warning signs in the overall situation. But I think it's also important to stress that you said that gender-inclusive infrastructure can make a difference in fragile countries, because the World Bank is embarking on more operations in fragile countries, and those are the countries where the battle for the SDGs and for eliminating poverty is being fought. And it would be the wrong lesson to basically be risk avoiding and to not engage, but you have to engage in the right way, in the right partnerships. I think that's one important lesson that I read also in the report and that we hear this morning. Thank you. On to Maninder. As several speakers have said, the important lessons have been learned and progress has been made. And I can't think of anybody better to reflect on that, Maninder, with your experience and your involvement in all those changes. To give us perhaps an overview of where the bank has made progress and what the next steps are. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Koen, and great to be part of this panel with so many allies and supporters of this crucially important agenda of gender-based violence and addressing sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, or SEAH. As we all know, I came through very clearly, if it ever needed to be reinforced, that it's one of the toughest development challenges. And what we have seen is over the past 4 or 5 years, the bank, learning from all the early experiences, is now as an institution fully committed to addressing gender-based violence through investment, research, learning, convening, all in collaboration with other stakeholders. So basically giving everything it takes to really make a huge dent on this challenge and problem. Given the prevalence of GBV around the world and in developing countries, bank projects may and often do increase the risks that women face from SEAH, sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, as was the case in Uganda and DRC transport projects. Based on this experience, in addition to addressing the specific issues in the project, with a late start, and in order to strengthen our ability to systematically address this issue going forward, the bank appointed the GBV task force in October of 2016, consisting primarily of external experts, including my good friend Moses over here, with the voice and all the support from Joy for Children and all of their transformational work in Uganda. And the bank prepared and implemented an action plan to implement the recommendations contained in this report in July, which came out in July 2017. And this plan has been implemented, but given the importance of the agenda, we continue to make more progress. We add other elements to the plan, and we have an annual update to the board. Given the importance of the agenda and the need to make continued progress, we do an annual report update to our board on what we as an institution have done and will plan to do going forward. As part of this action plan implementation, we have vastly strengthened our operational processes, including those related to procurement, to address SEAH in all of our operations. We developed a good practice note that describes how to address SEAH in projects involving major civil works. Recently, a note on how to establish and strengthen SEAH-sensitive grievance redress mechanisms that potential survivors can approach fearlessly with full confidentiality, involving a survivor-centric approach. And we have carried out massive amount of training and awareness raising among staff. So to date, more than 2,000 staff have been part of this training and awareness raising, almost all managers. So there has been a huge campaign over the past 4 years. As a result, addressing SEAH has become now an integral part of work that is carried out in all of World Bank's projects preparation and implementation. As we were reminded earlier, all of this work is carried out based on survivor-centered approaches, and it's an evolving field, so you always have to make progress reminding yourself what survivor-centered really means, and also enabling reporting of incidents in safe and protective environment for survivors and their families. Local communities and civil society play an all critical key role in all of these efforts, as Joy for Children and BIC played in the Uganda and DRC projects, and they have been both critics, but also huge allies in us making progress as an institution. And this is something which we are now mainstreaming through the ESF in all projects, with a requirement for a stakeholder engagement plan, which tries to ensure that involvement of civil society and stakeholders continues throughout the project cycle. Also, given the central role contractors play in helping prevent and respond to incidents of SEAH, we have significantly strengthened our procurement requirements for large works, with higher standards for contractors to prevent and respond to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. So some of these were mentioned: a code of conduct for all workers that is specifically focused on SEAH, disciplinary measures if it is violated, which is now done in each and every project that we have, which has workers and contractors, dedicated training for everyone and sensitization, a system for handling complaints and allegations if incidents do happen, and they do, and declaration of past SEAH issues and challenges by that contractor as part of the bid process that are factored into bid evaluation. So these have been some really important measures on the procurement side. Building on these, the bank further raised the bar recently and consequences for contractors by introducing a new disqualification mechanism, which were announced as part of the on November 24th as part of UN's 16th Day of Activism to end GBV, and the bank is currently the first MDB to introduce such a mechanism. Under this mechanism, contractors who fail to comply with obligations will not receive bank finance contracts anywhere in the world for 2 years. And this will apply to large contracts, large works contracts procured after January 1, 2021, and in projects which have high risk of SEAH. After this period, contractors will have to demonstrate, so it's not automatic, they will have to demonstrate their capacity to meet the bank's requirements for preventing and addressing SEAH before being able to receive a new bank finance contract. So this is a key provision, and we sincerely hope other MDBs will introduce similar provisions soon. Given that we need to work with a large number of stakeholders, building on civil society, local communities, we are also working with other MDBs, industry associations, civil society at national, international level, researchers, to help build a broad coalition to mainstream good SEAH-related practices in everything that we do. To accelerate progress, we recently hosted a workshop, a virtual workshop on November 18th with 10 other MDBs to discuss how we can harmonize our approaches to prevent, mitigate, and respond to SEAH in our respective operations, and agreed to collaborate more strongly in this area going forward. And this is an important collaboration because we believe that with help from other stakeholders, we are currently in a leadership position, but it takes everyone to push and pull in the same direction. So we really want all MDBs to have similar approaches to address these issues. Going beyond that, we do know all this work at the project level is critically important. However, if we have to address underlying issues of GBV, a stronger impact on prevention will require addressing root causes of this scourge at the societal level. So with that in mind, the bank is also working on GBV as a development issue in many borrowing countries and had made specific commitments under IDA 19 to support at least 5 IDA countries on GBV prevention and response through health systems, and at least 5 IDA countries on GBV prevention and response protocols as part of safe and inclusive schools. So looking back, again, with the support of BIC, of Joy for Children, other CSOs, and other, our board, our other partners, we have made tremendous progress looking back in this field over the past, I would say, 4 years, and currently are considered leaders among NDBs on this issue. But we continue to learn and further improve and refine our approaches as we acquire more experience on this difficult issue. One thing we've all learned is that it requires constant learning, constant humility, and trying to get better, with each intervention, with each new piece of research and knowledge that comes our way. And we do look forward to stronger collaboration among all development stakeholders going forward in order to make a lasting impact on the scourge of GBV around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maninder, for that overview. I think one factor also that hopefully contributes to more awareness of the bank is the increased decentralization of the bank. So the increased presence on the ground. So it's not just missions flying in, but it's basically people on the ground being in touch with the local population. So hopefully that will also have an impact in being more aware of these issues and being more able to prevent and to work constructively towards the right environment. Our last speaker before we get to questions, and the questions are coming in, so thank you very much. I've listed a lot of them already to ask. But Dubravka, you of course will not be commenting on the specific projects, but you have the overall overview of the issue of GBV, and a lot of issues have been discussed, including the survivor-centric approach, the need to basically do no harm at least. So I think there's a lot of issues where we look forward to hearing your views on these issues. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate at this important panel organized by World Bank and its inspection panel. I am participating as United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, what is an independent expert mechanism. And I'm very glad that 2 NGO representatives are also present at this panel. So we do have possibility to see different perspectives and different topics related to World Bank policy that is really transformative. I have briefly read your report, and later on, maybe I will comment on some specific issues, but from what I'm seeing, it is really transformative approach with respect to elimination of gender-based violence at the level of projects done by World Bank. If we look at my mandate and global perspective related to gender-based violence against women, it is important to know that gender-based violence against women and girls is a structural pandemic of ongoing human rights violations of women and girls, most pervasive, as stated by High Commissioner for Human Rights, based on unequal power relationship between women and men, and deeply rooted in discrimination against women in law, in practices, in harmful gender stereotypes and roles of women and girls in society. So when this mandate, my mandate as Special Rapporteur, was established in 1994, at that time, gender-based violence against women was not perceived as human rights violation. It was a time when, in 1993, Declaration on Elimination of Violence Against Women was adopted that clearly defined violence against women as gender-based violence that is causing physical, psychological, sexual harm, and so on, and that should be prevented, and focused on due diligence responsibility of states as primary responsible to prevention of such violence against women. So as a mandate holder, I am traveling to different countries, and during past 5 years, I have produced 10 country-specific reports on violence against women. And in each situation, I'm using human rights framework, UN human rights framework, what means UN human rights instruments, starting from Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And tomorrow we will have a Human Rights Day, but also other treaties with central role of CEDAW Convention, Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, Beijing Platform for Action, but also regional treaties. And basically, my mandate and other independent mechanisms are measuring each country with respect to implementation of those international standards. I'm also issuing thematic reports on specific issues. There are new focuses with respect to violence against women, for example, online or cyber violence. We are seeing many cases all over the world of increased violence against women. Recently, I have published a report on intersection of gender-based violence against women as pandemic and pandemic of COVID-19. And we are seeing that this intersection has very negative effect with respect to women's rights in general, but also increased levels of violence against women. And also the whole pandemic lockdown measures exposed pre-existing inequalities and shortcomings related to implementation of international standards. So I'm also having individual complaints procedure. So now I'm looking at what the World Bank is doing with respect to these complaints coming from individuals. And it is really important to see how we are changing lives of individual women and girls at the ground. What we are able to do, what my mandate is able to do at the UN level, what World Bank and all other stakeholders are able to do, and participation of non-governmental organizations is crucial. Also independent human rights institutions, parliamentarians, all those stakeholders that are moving this agenda in right direction. Let me also briefly mention that I have seen that you are trying to see what are indicators for different countries related to level of violence against women. And that was also a challenge for my mandate when I started in 2015 as a special rapporteur. So immediately in 2015, I have called all states to establish a femicide watch or observatories on femicides and violence against women. And the main idea is that all states around the world, they do collect homicide data on intentional killings. But from those data, only some of them have data on gender-related killings of women. And if we look at this data on gender-related killings of women, this is very specific objective category of data that could be traced as administrative data in different categories. So category of intimate partner killings, in which we have relationship between victim and perpetrator, is showing that for states that are collecting such data, out of 10 persons killed in context of intimate partner killings, more than 8 are women, or 80 or 90% are women. So this is really showing that prevention should go in that direction, and that home should be a very dangerous place for women and children. Then family-related killings are similar category because we also have relationship between victim and perpetrator. And third category are all other gender-related killings that could be based on motive. But here I'm immediately thinking about situations when you have peacekeepers or foreign workers, or situations in which you can have this type of relationship between victim and perpetrator that could be traced. And from such data, we are seeing in objective manner what is happening in different parts of the world. But this is the first step, and this should be obligation of all states to collect such data and to pull out such data from homicide data. And I'm glad that UNODC in Vienna is also now, in addition to homicide report, also producing femicide report. So World Bank could also use femicide report done by UNODC and data collected by my mandate. But next step is analysis of cases, because each case of gender-related killing or femicide is case that is not just number. It is whole story. What was missed, what was not done properly. In many cases around the world, we are seeing that women are calling police, that police is responding. Sometimes protection orders are completely inefficient. Sometimes there is breach of protection order. There is a miscommunication between police and public prosecutors. There is no sufficient number of protection orders or shelters and so on. So from those cases, through analysis of such cases, they should be done by Femicide Watch. What should be national preventive mechanisms that are maybe already there. If we have, for example, observatory on violence against women or any other mechanism that is dealing with collection of data, they could also add this Femicide Watch analysis of cases in order to see through analysis of cases what are those patterns, what are those shortcomings, and then to recommend changes at the level of laws, at the level of policies, what should be changed to prevent preventable deaths. So this is initiative that is really focusing on prevention of femicides, but also other forms of gender-based violence against women. And now if you look at sexual violence, it is the most underreported form of gender-based violence against women. When it is reported, it is very rarely prosecuted. When it is prosecuted, it is very rarely that we have punishment of perpetrators. So impunity is huge, and there are many obstacles that could be established in different countries. Now I'm preparing a new report on rape as a human rights violation, and also in a conflict situation as a violation of humanitarian law and crime at the international level. And what is visible, and it is not only one provision in the criminal law, it is other provisions that are related to that provision. So rape shield laws are also very important. Statute of limitation for prosecution of sexual violence is too short in many countries. Then if we look at definition of rape, it is so many different definitions of rape that are not based on a lack of consent, but are based on use of force. So you will have in many countries where World Bank is working different rape laws, and you will see that basically what we are having today is huge impunity with respect to perpetrators. And we have to go back to international standards. We have to go step by step to see what is not done properly in terms of incorporation and implementation of such standards. And I hope that jointly with this type of more targeted work, what I'm now seeing also from this report, we are going in direction of really focusing on what should be changed, how it should be changed, and how human rights agenda and how human rights of women and girls should be properly protected in this whole area. So I'm looking forward for discussion, and I think the challenges are huge. We are seeing good examples, but they are still not sufficient in order to change this normalization of gender-based violence against women that is currently situation all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dubravka, for basically sketching the overall context and pointing out the importance of combating impunity, basically, the overall context that basically makes GBV possible and that needs to be taken into consideration. Thank you. We now completed our first round of statements. I got a lot of questions already, so thank you everyone for sharing questions. Maybe, Dubravka, I can share the first question with you, and that's from the World Bank Group Disabled Staff Association, and they're asking about the double risk for GBV basically faced by disabled women and girls. And I'll ask Moses afterwards to comment on that as well, but What's your take on that?
Thank you for this question. And when I'm traveling to different countries, I'm always meeting with different groups, including disabled women. And there are different challenges in different countries related to law, related to praxis, access to sexual and reproductive rights, general protection, issues related to different areas. So it is important in each country to see level of legislation and implementation and compliance with international standards, and to be aware that this intersectional discrimination is really targeted these groups differently. There are multiple layers that should be examined, and very specific recommendations should be put forward. For example, in some countries, they have huge problems with reproductive rights, in accessing their rights, in accessing whole area, because there are so many prejudices with respect to disabled women and their sexual and reproductive rights. So then the issues related to capacity of women with disabilities are questioned in many states. So on specific cases, I always have specific recommendations, but that are based on human rights framework. Thank you.
I'm getting, before I go to Moses with two questions, just to say there's a lot of comments on the chat, basically welcoming the World Bank's initiative to disqualify contractors who do not do enough to protect. Very much welcome the initiative. Also stressing the crucial role of CSOs, Cheryl Thomas, John Garrison, at both the local level and the international level in doing the job, and the importance of that partnership. Moses, if I can ask you two questions. The first question is whether you recognize the fact that disabled women and girls are more at risk. And the second question is what was discussed basically earlier, but maybe you can go into the issue of what do we do with the fear of stigmatization? How did women and girls in your case, how did they overcome the fear of stigmatization and thought it was worthwhile to basically speak out? So how do we facilitate that? Over to you.
Thank you very much. I think one thing that I should say that the situation of women, probably and girls who are living with disability may affect them differently depending on countries where they are. If I speak for my own country, Uganda, where the issues of persons with disability still remain with a lot of gaps, then we're going to see some of these cases increasing, or maybe some of these women and girls who are disabled having more targeted for abuse and exploitation. We have had some of these cases in some instances where, because these girls cannot speak, or nobody will trust them, they are speaking the truth, or they take advantage of them because either they will not run away, or they will not be able to mention who probably abused them, then they become much more at risk of abuse and exploitation. And my take here would be that it would be good for the bank and the borrower countries, and including the implementing companies, to also focus or pay particular attention to this special group of people, because of the multiple challenges that they may face as a result of these projects. And so for me, in my own experience, I would say yes, these ones are more at risk, and in all our intervention and approaches, we should even pay more attention to these groups. In terms of stigmatization, I think, like earlier we discussed, the critical role played by the civil society organizations cannot be underestimated, because we are much more. This meeting is no longer being recorded. We are much more close to the communities. We know the people, and also the involvement of the people that are affected by these projects help build the confidence, but also help them to build support system, supporting whoever is involved and whoever is affected by this project. And so I would recommend that the critical role that is played by the civil society organizations in the communities where bank is financing some project, shouldn't be underestimated and should always be leveraged on, because even when the bank, in our own experience that went to the community alone, they are not able to get cases, or probably the approach they used was more intimidating and people wouldn't come out. And so having trusted partners, the civil society and other people in the community, could build much trust and eliminate the aspects of stigmatization that may come with GBV related cases. Thank you.
Very much, Moses, and thank you, Abiodun Adribikwe, for this excellent question on stigmatization. I have a couple of questions on basically factual questions on the bank. I think Maninder will be mostly impacted. So Lalana da Silva from the Green Climate Fund asks, who pays for a remedy in the case of the bank? Is it the borrower or is it the bank? And I'll add another question, and that is by Ira Azix from St. Lucia. Is there a policy on GBV to share? So Maninder, over to you.
Thanks, Koen. I think in terms of who pays, so given the lessons from Uganda, where because the issue had not been properly anticipated and we had to put in place an emergency response plan and making some immediate availability of contingency funding. Now, every project has the provision that depending on the level of risk, GBV service providers are identified, and so that all support can be provided without loss of precious time as soon as an incident is identified and a survivor comes forward. And for high-risk projects, these service providers are contracted in advance. The provision is made for funding so that, and so it comes from the project. It's not something that the bank pays separately. It comes from the project. And with the new good practice note and all the provisions we have, the provision for resources to pay for any mitigation when cases are identified is made in projects. So that's something which you do want to see routinized. You, in fact, would not want a situation where every time something happens, there is a process to get resources from outside the project from some other source. So that's something which seems to be working very well. And the other question was, Koen,
whether there's a GBV policy.
Yes, of course. So we'll be happy to share. It is we have the good practice note on addressing SEA-Asian projects with major civil works. We have a note on addressing impacts related to labor influx, and all of these are available online. But we will be happy to I can put my email in the chat, and we'll be happy to provide them to the people who ask them. But yes, we have a set of good practice notes and other notes that people will find very useful. Also one on grievance redress mechanisms, which I mentioned, which is a recent entry.
Very much, Maninder. The next question is by Joy Pasa, and that is basically, okay, so there's more, we're listening more to women in project areas, but how are women in project areas informed? How are they made aware? Maybe I could ask Elana and Imrana to respond to that question. Elana?
Sure, that's a great question, Koen, because it's something that we as BIC advocate for a lot, which is that there is a need for community members to both understand that there is a project that is financed by the World Bank and that there are mechanisms to report any issues with the project. And that includes project level grievance redress mechanisms, but it also includes the inspection panel. The bank should be doing consultations, should be sharing information on projects in project communities through a variety of means, both technological and paper signs put up in the community. But it is our experience that the vast majority of cases that we get involved in, communities are not even aware that the World Bank is involved, much less understand how to report cases of sexual exploitation or gender-based violence. And so we often come into communities and say, hey, you know, what's going on with this World Bank project? And people say, wait, that's a World Bank project? And a lot of times the way we end up involved in a particular project in a community is that a community is having a problem due to an infrastructure project, and they're trying to find out information on that project. There's a local civil society organization that connects to a national civil society organization that eventually connects up to us. And then we're able to connect them to the bank. It doesn't seem to be happening well at the grassroots level, with grassroots organizations actually able to help communities connect with bank mechanisms where sexual exploitation and gender-based violence is happening. Our sort of evidence that we've seen suggests that grievance redress mechanisms at the local level are rarely effective. And oftentimes communities have no idea how to use them.
Thank you, Elana. I'll ask Maninder also to comment on this, but maybe first, Imrana.
Sure, Koen, thank you. So some banks require project teams to advertise the accountability mechanisms during the consultation process. And I know for a fact that Asian Development Bank does this quite proactively because I worked there. I don't quite know what the World Bank does, and I'm interested to hear Maninder's comment on this. My own view, and it's a very personal view, Koen, is that when the consultation process is taking place, when the due diligence teams are out in the communities consulting on the project, it is at that stage that the communities need to be told not only about there's a project grievance mechanism, but there's also a grievance redress service at the World Bank, but also, and I think this is not conveyed often, and I stand to be corrected, that there is an inspection panel, or in another IFI, there's an independent accountability mechanism to which you can file a complaint. So I would suggest that this be more proactively done. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Maninder?
Yes, Koen. I think so. On the issue of sensitization of communities is central, and in fact, all of the other measures which I listed, you know, all of the other measures that we talk about, codes of conduct and, you know, accountability mechanisms, all of those would fail if communities are not sensitized and they are not aware of what is adequate, what is appropriate behavior for a contractor, or what to expect when a project is being built in their area. So as part of, since the GPN came into effect in October 2018, all stakeholder engagement and consultations in the project area do need to address and flag the issue of risks associated with GBV and SEAH. And, you know, so it would be, I think 4 or 5 years ago, this issue was not being flagged, but since us strengthening our processes and you know, approaches on this is a fundamental requirement. And also communities members are also supposed to be informed, and, you know, all substantial high risk projects, they are informed that workers have signed this code of conduct. So please, if you see any untoward behavior from a worker, this is not, you need to report it. And signage in the project area is also a requirement, which is very clearly identified in the good practice note, that there should be signs all over the project area about, you know, visual signs, or, you know, signs that people can read about the fact that sexual violence is not tolerated. And if you observe or get to know of any incident, this is where you report.
And I also would add that, once again, that the decentralization of the bank hopefully helps to make those local mechanisms more relevant and more impactful. But that's something, of course, that will have to be borne out by the evidence. Karen Groen, the gender director of the bank, in the chat, basically, there was the question about, is there a GBV policy, and she invites people to consult the World Bank Group gender strategy as well, which has a very important point to make on GBV, and there's also online several guidance notes. So if you basically type World Bank Group gender, you will find a lot of information. Thank you, Karen, for sharing that with us. I have a question for Moses, and that's a really general question, but I still would like to hear your comments on that. And that is basically, what's the role of poverty in the abuse? Over to you.
So thank you so much. And I think we all know that some of these, in the communities where, of course, there's poverty, then also we see so many other things are going on. And also it becomes also so bad where you are in the community where there are high levels of poverty, and then the projects come with a lot of money. So that makes the situation really complicated. In the sense that in some of the stories, for example, there would be those that were abusing the girls. Some of them were drivers, but they talk as managers because they ride or they drive these huge cars, and they're able to say, you know, I'm the contract manager, I have a lot of money and all that. And where you find communities that are desperate for survival and are looking for how they will meet their daily needs, then that becomes another very complex issue. But also that means some of these communities also cannot seek services. Some of these communities cannot seek redress, probably where there are challenges. For example, there was one of the parents who had a girl missing, but they had nowhere to start from. And they couldn't even report, they couldn't even follow up or make calls or go where they have said the child is. So you can see how poverty can complicate already the bad situation when it comes to these projects and the lives of the local communities.
Thank you very much for those insights on the very important aspect of this question. I have two more questions for Maninder from Jody Schwartz from BIG. The first question is whether the COVID crisis is having an impact on realizing the IDA goals that you mentioned, and perhaps also the overall implementation of the policy, because there's less access to project areas. We're doing more things remotely. So does COVID have an impact? And secondly, what would you say are can you already report? You've reported the institutional changes, but are there success stories in terms of a project that you would mention that really stands out in taking GBV seriously? Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Koen. I think so. COVID has been a constraint on everything, and including on the efforts on anything that requires interface with communities and beneficiaries. So it has been a constraint, no doubt. But what is remarkable to see is the amount of innovation that has taken place as a result of COVID. So we have COVID response projects that are addressing issues of SEAH as part of community engagement, mentioned in all stakeholder engagement plans, which are disclosed. Drafts are disclosed, and final plans are disclosed. They do talk of how issues of SEAH, or there will be consultations on issues of GBV and SEAH. There are, as part of community engagement, which can be virtual or in fact through conventional means. You can have snail mail, telephone lines, and in fact, in reporting individual cases or concerns, we have found those to be extremely effective. In fact, sometimes better than larger meetings where there may be 100 people. You can have, there's direct outreach to people and information on where they can register concerns or make suggestions. So in that, SEAH issues are being mentioned, and in part of community outreach, people are being trained, counterparts and the grievance redress mechanisms are trained to pick up on these issues, even if they are being not directly mentioned. So if there is anything about, harassment or, rudeness or any indirect behavior, we are training our counterparts to pick up on those words to be aware that this may reflect an underlying GBV issue. And then all of the entities having interface with communities, they are being provided with information on service providers. So in case they suspect something, they see anything, they hear anything, they know who to refer to. And so again, we are doing it in a COVID responsive way so that it's not overly onerous, but there are mechanisms which are in place which products are able to pivot around to make sure that SCAH is being addressed. Our COVID response project in Sri Lanka is an excellent example of that, and it is doing, training of health workers, sensitization, signage in all health facilities, information about hotlines, linking to GBV service providers. So all of that is being done. So that's one project I would like to mention. In terms of overall success stories, again, thanks to the work done by our very committed cadre of people in the bank, our civil society colleagues, BAKE, Joy for Children, and others, this is one issue where there is extreme sensitization. So this is not an issue where when you flag
this meeting is no longer
any
being
team
recorded.
or counterpart says this is not important. So there are many, many, many success stories. I think what we are seeing some transformational scale up in some projects. And there I would like to mention there's a project which supports teachers' salaries in education project in DRC, which covers almost 1/3 of the country. So it will be providing salaries to teachers in 1/3 of the country. And there are path-breaking, really innovative, transformational measures related to prevention of SCAH, of identifying, of ability to report, immediate linkage to service providers, teachers signing codes of conduct. So that's one example which is at scale. But in terms of projects which are infrastructure projects involving civil works, I would say, I'm pleased to say that I believe all of our projects are following the requirements of the good practice note. And again, we rely on civil society, or continue to rely on them to make sure that this is happening. And there are mechanisms in place if things are not proceeding as proposed and planned and designed, that they can be picked up as early as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Maninder. I have a question from Debbie Stoddard. Basically, she says that during a consultation, she raised the issue of GBV risk and was basically told, well, you're depriving people in the project area of the potential of the project. And that is, of course, a big risk, that we're going to see this as instead of seeing action on GBV as an enabler of a project, that we see it as an obstacle. Elena, would you like to respond to that question?
Yes, thanks so much, Koen, and thanks, Debbie, for the comment and question. And I think it's a hugely important point because it really relates to my concern that civil society is frequently treated as either a box checking exercise by the bank or an obstacle to getting money out the door and getting projects done, rather than as what I believe civil society is, which is a partner and a resource in doing development. Yeah. And I think that, the problem that we often see is that when civil society raises concerns that need to be dealt with, a lot of times borrowers see that as, one more thing we have to deal with in order to get this project completed, rather than, here's a way that we can sort of solve some serious problems and do better with our projects. And I think one of the things that I'm seeing that's really interesting is that there's a really big split within the World Bank where you have a lot of amazing task team leaders and management folks like Maninder who are really trying very hard to do development well and are taking GBV seriously. And then you have others, and Koen, I'm going to disagree with your point a bit about the benefits of sort of diffusing authority to the regions and country offices, because one of the things that we have seen in our experience, and Moses may be able to speak to this a bit as well, is that in many cases, World Bank staff in country offices is very close to country governments, not very close to communities and civil society in country. And we have a bunch of partners in a variety of countries who joke that the only time they get called to the country office for a meeting is when someone from DC is visiting. And so my concern is that you often see a lack of buy-in on some of this stuff from the country offices. And it's those country offices and country governments that are treating raising concerns around GBV as an obstacle and a nuisance. Whereas if you are able to reach someone like a Maninder or high-level folks within the World Bank DC office, they completely understand how important the issue is. And so one of my big things is, how do we really sensitize, not just through quick trainings and policy documents, but through sort of a cultural shift, the folks in country office about why violence against women and honestly, you know, mistreatment of a variety of marginalized groups is an issue for the bank to care about if it wants to do development well.
Thank you very much, Elana. The next question is by, I'm going to ask Dubravka a question, and that is by Genge Ha. And that is, how can the World Bank address this issue when the country's own legal framework isn't strong? And you've come across this, of course, that when you basically look into the violations, but you also look into the legal framework. So any advice on how to address this?
Dubravka, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Please unmute.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this very important question, because gender-based violence is a human rights violation, and main responsibility should be on states to prevent such violence, to adopt laws that are addressing such violence, to provide services for victims, to prosecute perpetrators. There is also responsibility with respect to private persons, due diligence responsibility, and intermediaries or non-state actors. But when we are dealing with states that are not having laws in line with international standards, it is extremely important that World Bank is also using those international standards that states have accepted. For example, Uganda and DRC both ratified the CEDAW Convention. They are also following Beijing Platform for Action. There is also Maputo Protocol. So there are also different mechanisms, including my mandate, that are producing recommendations how to close gaps between those international standards accepted by specific countries and realities at the ground. And it is a process that should be supported also by World Bank, and I would like to suggest that World Bank could also include references to human rights instruments for countries that have ratified those instruments, because they are already having obligation on a state to implement those ratified instruments. So with support of the World Bank that is going into directions that are already addressed by recommendations coming from, let's say, my mandate or CEDAW committee or in African situation, African Commission on Human Rights, Rapporteur on women's rights and so on, those recommendations should be also something that should be used as a roadmap for World Bank. Of course, I'm looking at non-governmental organizations, but also independent human rights institutions. It is important to also connect with parliamentarians to see how to proceed with changes of laws that are needed, because we need to also have changes of those discriminatory laws that are still there in many countries. There are still discriminatory pieces of constitution in many states that are not changed despite all promises and all commitments and so on. So there is a situation in which World Bank should really look into international standards as tools that should be used directly by World Bank jointly with a state concerned and all other stakeholders in that state to go in changes, in the level of changes that are needed to address what is needed to first adopt laws that are harmonized and in line with international standards on gender-based violence against women. And here I would like to mention, in addition to CEDAW Convention that I have already mentioned, there is new General Recommendation number 35 on gender-based violence against women that was done by CEDAW committee, but in cooperation with my mandate. Because in this area of violence against women, standards are very complicated because it's never only just one law. It's not only law on domestic violence or violence against women. You have to look also into criminal law, a criminal procedure law, into services that are available, into educational systems. So there are different levels of pieces of law that should be aligned, and then cooperation between different mechanisms at the national level is also needed. So situation is more difficult than you can see just if you're looking at violence against women legislation. So we need to really use those roadmaps that are there. And here I would like to suggest more promotion of General Recommendation number 35 on gender-based violence against women done by CEDAW committee. That is in line with also Istanbul Convention, new convention of the Council of Europe dealing with elimination of violence against women and domestic violence. So just to cut it short, we do have vaccine against gender-based violence, but it is not used. So those standards are not implemented fully. All stakeholders should really enshrine all those standards in their statutes, in their code of conduct, and we all jointly need to look into implementation side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Imrana if she would like to comment on this question as well, and maybe after that, Maninder. Imrana.
Thank you, Koen. Just very shortly, I wanted to underscore the importance of this question, but also Dubravka has clearly pointed out the lack of access to the courts of law. For those of you who will read the report, not only our advisory, but also the original investigation reports, you will see there that one of the most consistent issues that came up with the women and girls who had been victims of gender-based violence is their fear of going to the courts of law. They feared access, they feared the lack of gender sensitivity on the part of the police and the prosecuting authorities. So this is a huge problem, and Dubravka has pointed this out in her various reports and her dialogues with different countries, that it's a consistent response, not only from the poorer countries, but also from the more wealthy Part 1 countries as well, that we still do not have a situation where complaints can be made to a gender-responsive justice agency. And this is why it is so important that the that management of the bank conveys to communities where there is a high risk of gender-based violence, that that the inspection panel is there, the grievance redress service is there for complaints to be heard, because of the lack of gender sensitivity and the context of impunity for perpetrators of gender-based violence. So the inspection panel resolution, section 61, says that management shall make every effort to communicate to the communities when they are doing the consultation process of the existence of the panel. So I think that this is a very important point in the resolution, and it needs to be more proactively acted upon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I connect that to Elena's earlier point that yes, decentralization is a great idea, but if people don't connect to the overall message, then you have a problem. So it makes it extra important to basically make sure that that link is there. Maninder, would you like to comment on this? So the difficulty of operating in an environment that is that may not be that may not have everything in place in terms of the national system.
Right. So, this is it is a tough question in practice on the ground. And so a few things. I think the centrality of survivor-centered approaches is really important. So one really important aspect is that whenever a survivor does take the courage to come forward, then there is immediate offer of services, psychosocial, health, and then in some cases, legal services are always offered, should be offered, but very often or quite often, survivors do not want to avail of legal services right away. And because they know their world and their circumstances much better than anyone else, so you need to trust them. And if they want to avail of legal services and they want to approach justice systems, then they should be and are enabled. But sometimes that's not the case. But even for that to happen, there is need for a very sensitive, SEAH sensitive grievance redress mechanism, which is widely disseminated. And I think it's a good suggestion that when that is done as part of sensitization and awareness of SEAH sensitive GRMs, there is also information on other avenues that are available. So it's GRS, inspection panel, local systems. Almost all countries do have local systems also. Sometimes they don't function. And in some cases, which of high risk projects, we actually look at those systems to make sure that, they are durable and they will function in the project area. But fully agree that all avenues of approaching, depending on the level of comfort and where you are, those should be fully shared with the community. And that's something that's something we should do even better going forward. What we do, this is a difficult domain, so it's just to not to underestimate the challenges of this. So we also find cases where immediately, in the immediate aftermath of the incident, the survivors are clearly not in a place where they want to think of justice and courts and police, etc. So there is guidance on that, kind of technical, these are technical tips on what kind of basic evidence can be recorded by GBV service providers, which then at a later date, in a year or two after the incident, the survivor may be in a very different place. And then they may want to pursue, in many cases, they do want to pursue kind of legal recourse. But that should not fail for lack of basic evidence. So service providers they just make a record, they don't share it with anyone, they just keep it with them. So that provides us with the ability of accessing these systems subsequently. Dr. Mukwege from DRC, he gave us a lot of advice and tips on how to do this in a fully survivor-centric manner, fully recognizing that you should not expect the survivors to immediately want retribution, and but then at least give them enough basis that if subsequently they want to do that, they should be able to do. The area of not having services, that is the one we are all grappling with, and I think that's where the development community needs to pay more attention. What about really remote locations where for hundreds of miles you may not have any service provision? So again, we try to ensure that in high-risk projects with very little GBV service provision ability, that there are project-specific mechanisms which are available. But that's a field where we hope a lot more work to be done in the near future, because that's one of the central challenges we are facing in the next phase of pushing the boundaries of survivor-centric approaches.
Thank you very much, and that is indeed where advice from people like Dr. Mukwege, but also people like Moses, is of course incredibly important to have that outreach and basically try to get more feedback from on the ground. Thank you very much. I have another question for you, Maninder. That's from Juha Sapala of the Nordic Development Fund, and that is whether a gender analysis is a requirement. I'm sure Karen Groen is also interested in that question, but I'm handing it to you.
Yeah, I think so. Karen is my guru on this, so I hope I pass the test. So I think what the strategy provides for, and Karen and team have been doing some, really important work in this area, is that it should be that we should move beyond broad generic gender analysis. it should be more tailored. And there are pillars in the gender strategy on different aspects of issues and challenges, but that it should be tailored to the context and the situation, and depending on what the key barriers are and what the context is. And that's been a bit of a movement, more recently, that instead of just saying you should carry out a gender analysis, and then you get, you may not always get fit for purpose by just having this generic requirement. So something that's analysis is important, it's fundamental, but it should be tailored to exactly what a development intervention is, what the opportunities are, what the challenges, and what the context is. So that's, and it's again, you already mentioned the gender strategy, Koen. I think that's some, people should refer to the gender strategy that has a much more nuanced description of this approach.
Thank you very much. We're getting towards the end of our session, but one thing I would like to ask Imrana is you basically have produced a report with good lessons for the bank and the development community. But in terms of the panel's own work, what lessons have you learned during this case? You mentioned the issue of evidence, that was basically you had to basically rethink a bit what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what's the standard, but what are other lessons you take yourself from these cases?
Thank you, Koen. As I said, when the first complaint was made in 2014, this was clearly, unprecedented, not just for the bank, but for the inspection panel as well. And so when we approached the first investigation, we hired various gender specialists to assist us with the complaint. But during this process, we learned ourselves that we had to, for example, use people who had more specific gender expertise in the investigative area. So when we dealt with a subsequent DRC complaint, we had learned from the experience of the Uganda investigation. We'd learned good practices, as in everything you gain from the experience. Our second complaint was dealt with in a more sophisticated way. We used a special investigator who had, for example, worked in various FCV countries. We were more cautious and more methodical. And of course, one of the reasons we looked for even more corroborative evidence was that initially the bank did not necessarily accept the claims that had been made in the DRC case because of the specific context of the DRC. It's lots of humanitarian problems. It's much more difficult to do investigations in FCV countries. And of course, in the DRC, the presence of military forces and civilian militia led to a climate of intimidation and fear. So the inspection panel had to tread very carefully. We collected more corroborative evidence. Even though we were not required to look for a higher level of proof, we actually did, so that our report could withstand more objective scrutiny. The difference between the DRC matter and the Uganda matter is that unlike Uganda, where Joy for Children was a very strong and effective liaison for us, the inspection panel did not have quite the same support from the NGO community as it did in Uganda. So all these different contexts led us to look for more corroboration, to look for more credible evidence, to look for more similar fact-patterned evidence. So in a sense, during the DRC investigation, the inspection panel used a slightly more, if you will, for want of a better word, a slightly more prosecutorial approach in collecting the evidence and providing a threshold level of evidence upon which bank management could act. So we learned during this process, and Although, of course, we hope that we don't receive any more GBV complaints, we feel that we're in a stronger and better position to be able to respond to them should it occur again. Thank you, Koen.
Very much, Imrana. Maninder, maybe you've been through this process of improving the bank's approach on these issues. What do you think is a lot has been achieved as the report reflects and as you reflected earlier? What is the next step? What's the holy grail that is still out there in your view?
So I would, thanks, Koen. I would flag two areas, one very operational and micro, and one macro and more institutional or global. I think the micro one is the one I mentioned to you, that we still need, there are some very specific questions on how, so we have a very wholesome approach, which kind of, which is well integrated, it's wholesome, that's the way to describe it. But then you can't always rely on all pieces being available in the context that you are operating in. So, in the context of Congo, for example, there are provinces where over 500 miles, you will not have any ability to provide immediate help for GBV, services. And you may have low risk environments in that area, but as we have gained from, learned from experience, a low risk is, things can happen in low risk also. You can't, in this field, you can't say low risk means no incidents are going to happen. But it's low risk, it's remote, it's low capacity, it's vast areas of unserviced, unsupported by GBV services. What do you do? What are operationally feasible approaches that our clients can embrace and can own and support? So that's one question. That's kind of the main one. There are a couple of other, these very specific questions. The good news is that, we have gotten to a stage where we can start addressing these really fine questions. And the amount of internalization and mainstreaming and adoption of all the good practice advice on this guidelines it's remarkable. Unlike I've been in the bank for 27 years and I've worked on many issues from very basic. You and I, Koen, 25 years ago, we were going to the board. I was going to the board. You were there on OP 4.12, and so resettlement and other areas. They take time to reach fruition, to reach maturity. If you are to compare, it's just remarkable how quickly there is mainstreaming, full ownership, desire to do the best thing possible. But still, there are some fine areas. So it's great that we are here, but I think now we need to work on some really fine specific areas which continue to be challenges. And again, BIC has provided us with excellent advice by getting best experts, even when we were preparing the good practice note. And these are areas we will continue to find solution with their help and support from other partners. So that's one. The second one is what I referred to briefly in my opening remarks, that these standards need to be adopted by everyone. What I don't, it's very difficult to imagine World Bank as an institution or one other institution saying, these are our policies. Because if you're a client country and you're dealing with 10 agencies, bilaterals, multilaterals, and then only 2 of them or 3 of them require something and others don't require anything. I was a client of the bank once upon a time, 27 years ago. So I would find it hard to imagine how are they going to maneuver, depending on the donor and the development partner. Do I need to do more or less or nothing? That's going to make this entire world of this area very confusing for clients. So if we want to help them, if we want to really move the needle, we need to come together as an international development community to have harmonized approaches to address these issues. So one of my challenges is really micro and one is really global and macro. Thank you.
you very much, Maninder. Before I close, I would like to give the floor actually to Moses and ask him the same question. What is, you started with a story of hope, basically saying, well, a lot has been achieved, my voice has been heard. In spite of what has happened, the voices of those affected were taken seriously. But what is still missing? What is still out there that you're hoping for? Moses, you have the floor.
Yes, I'm right here. Yeah, thanks so much for that question. And I think through our interaction with the World Bank, we recognize that, of course, there were a lot of progresses and a lot of good things that were made. But also, I think when you come back into the redress section, I think the solutions provided for the communities were relatively inadequate. For example, some of these girls, the support that was given was not enough to see them through. In my initial thought, I thought that World Bank with the government probably would see these girls are supported much more, especially through education, to be able to complete given levels so that they're able to fend for themselves. But also the level of support in a couple of months, I think it was less than 1 year that was given to the girls. And especially the girls who experienced GBV, in my view, was not very. I think it was not a very good step taken. But I would think that probably in the future there should be more of again a thinking through, not in terms of wanting to say we have done something, but to think back and see these kind of solutions or response we're giving to these people, are they enough? Well, for some people who had some related complaints, especially on compensation and accidents, of course, some of them walked away with money and all that, and they would go reconstruct their lives. But for the girls that needed more nurturing, more counseling, more guidance, more visits and more support, I think that around that area, it fell short. So I think we had engagements with the management in the boardrooms, including the local communities. Of course, there were areas that we agreed on, and the areas also we said, okay, for what has been done, we could move and look at future improvements. But if you're looking going forward, I think those are potential areas of consideration in terms of supporting affected communities.
Very much. I think basically a lot has been done, but more needs to be done. I think that's a very clear message we're getting here, and I think that's a good message to end on. I'd just like to highlight a few points. First of all, the importance of the announcement that the bank made about the disqualification of contractors that are not taking action. I think that's a very positive step. I think the importance of the survivor-centric approach was very much stressed. That's what it's all about, and that should be front and center. The importance also of not avoiding but engaging gender inclusive infrastructure. Basically, this is important work we're doing. We just have to do it in the right way. So I think that's important to stress. We're not talking about stopping something. We're talking about improving something. The partnership with CSOs, very much highlighted by everyone, how important this is, a true partnership, and we've seen the fruits of that. Also the importance of the broader partnership for gender equality, GBV, and dare I say it, even the rule of law is incredibly important as well. So I think those are some major messages. I'd like to thank Imrana and the panel for basically producing this document that is food for thought and food for discussion, and I think will be incredibly helpful to establishing that partnership that Maninder was talking about, that it not be only the World Bank, but also others who are involved. I'd like to thank Moses for being with us today. I really appreciate the insights we got from you, which were very specific and very much the signals that need to be taken seriously. Elana, thank you for being with us today. Dubravka, thank you for sharing your insights and broadening our understanding. I think that was incredibly important. Also, of course, I'd like to refer to the High Commissioner. She's not with us now, but I really appreciated her input at the start of the meeting. And last but not least, Maninder, thank you for all you're doing on this and for sharing that with us. I'm sure that we can also put some links on the inspection panel website on the issues that Maninder raised and the issues that Karen Groen raised, so that people can access it even after the chat, giving that for consideration of the panel. Thank you all, and wishing you all a great day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Koen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Elana. Thank you, Moses.
Bye-bye, Imran. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Imrana. Thank you all.
Dubravka, thank you so much. I'll be in touch. I'll be in touch by email.
Let's stay in touch because partnership is really good, and I really support fully this idea that at the global level we need to have more emphasis on joint activities related to elimination of violence against women. SDG agenda and other instruments are really good that we need to focus on.
Thank you, Dubravka. Bye, Moses. Bye.
Bye-bye.